The crimson sky of Kepler 442b burned like an open wound as Dr. Kang Minho pressed his face against the energy barrier that surrounded their dying world. Beyond the shimmering wall, he could see the Jeltari ships waiting. Beautiful vessels with smooth curves and glowing panels, filled with beings whose minds worked as one perfect unit. The Vithka were different. Their thoughts remained locked inside their own heads, unable to join the great neural network that connected every other intelligent species in the galaxy. This difference had once made them curious. Now it made them condemned. Minho's hands shook as he watched another transport ship land in the distance. Not a rescue ship, never that. These ships brought equipment to make their prison smaller. Every week, the barriers moved closer. Every week, their world grew smaller. Dr. Kang, a soft voice called behind him. He turned to see Dr. Park Suyin approaching with her data tablet clutched against her chest. Her dark eyes held the same exhaustion that lived in all their faces now. The council sent another message. Minho did not want to hear it, but he nodded anyway. Suyin's voice was barely above a whisper as she read from the tablet. The Galactic Council reminds all Vithka that your neural deficiency poses a contamination risk to civilized society. Your quarantine will continue until natural population decline eliminates the threat. Natural population decline. Such clean words for slow murder. In the medical bay across the settlement, Kim Ji-hoon worked over a young child whose parents had already died from the stress of their situation. The little girl's fever burned hot, but their medicine supplies grew smaller each day. Ji-hoon's gentle hands checked her pulse while her grandmother held her tiny fingers. Will she get better? The grandmother asked in their ancient language. Ji-hoon could not lie, but he could not speak the truth either. Instead, he adjusted the child's blanket and whispered old songs that his own grandmother had sung to him long ago. The settlements that once housed 40 million Vithka now held less than 8 million. Some had died from illness. Others had simply stopped eating, their hope finally exhausted. The lucky ones had died quickly when the barriers first activated, crushed by the sudden energy walls that cut through buildings and families without warning. Lee Hyun-woo sat in the engineering section, staring at screens that showed him things he wished he could not see. The power readings from the barriers were increasing every day. Soon they would be strong enough to block even their basic communication systems. Then they would truly be alone. Hyun-woo, Minho called as he entered the small room. Can we still reach the outer communication array? The young engineer looked up with surprise. Yes, but why would we want to? Nobody listens to our signals anymore. Minho sat down beside him, feeling every one of his 53 years in his aching bones. Maybe nobody in our part of the galaxy. But space is big, Hyun-woo. Very big. Through the settlement's narrow streets, Vithka families shared their evening meals. Parents told children old stories about the time before the barriers, when their people had built great cities and composed music that made the stars weep with beauty. The children listened with wide eyes, trying to imagine a world where being different was not a death sentence. The Galactic Council had made their decision 3 years ago. The Vithka's neural independence was classified as a mental illness that could spread to other species. Never mind that the Vithka had created art that moved hearts across a dozen worlds. Never mind that their scientists had discovered new medicines that saved millions of lives. Never mind that their philosophers had written books that changed how people thought about existence itself. None of that mattered now. They were different, and the galaxy had decided that different meant dangerous. In his laboratory, Minho worked late into the night, preparing the message he hoped might save his people. The words had to be perfect. They would only get one chance to send it before the Jeltari discovered what they were doing and tightened the barriers even more. Suyin found him there as the twin suns began to rise. You really think someone will answer? She asked, setting a cup of weak tea beside his workstation. I have to believe it, Minho replied without looking up from his writing. Somewhere in this galaxy, there must be others like us. Others who think with their own minds and value what makes each person special. The tea grew cold as he worked, crafting words that carried the weight of his entire civilization. Outside, the energy barriers hummed their constant song of imprisonment. But for the first time in months, Minho felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The message would go out tonight, traveling through the dark spaces between stars, searching for minds that understood what it meant to be truly individual. Whether anyone would hear it or care enough to answer, he could not know. But in a universe where conformity had become law, even the smallest act of rebellion felt like victory. The Vithka would not die in silence. The maintenance tunnels under the communication array smelled like rust and fear. Dr. Kang Minho crawled through the narrow space, his tools scraping against the metal walls with each movement. Above him, The massive dish that could send messages across the galaxy sat silent and forgotten by their Jeltari guards. Lee Hyun-woo waited at the surface, his hands trembling as he watched the patrol patterns on his small scanner. The young engineer had volunteered for this dangerous job, knowing that if they were caught, the barriers would close tighter around their people. Maybe tight enough to crush them all. Signal connection established, Minho whispered into his tiny communicator. His fingers worked quickly in the dark, connecting wires that had not carried power for months. Beginning power transfer. The dish above began to move with a soft whirring sound. To Minho's ears, it sounded as loud as thunder. Every second they used this equipment brought them closer to discovery. But without it, his people would die in silence, forgotten by a galaxy that had already written their obituary. Broadcast ready, he said, his voice barely audible. Sending message now. The words he had written carried everything he felt about his dying people. Simple words, but filled with all the hope and pain of 40 million souls facing extinction. The signal raced away from their world at the speed of light, carrying their plea into the vast darkness between stars. On the planet Zirion Prime, the message reached the great crystal beings who ruled the northern spiral arm. Their collective mind processed the signal in less than a second, then deleted it without a thought. Individual consciousness was a disease they had eliminated from their own species long ago. The Reptilian Empire received the transmission at their military headquarters on Draco 7. Admiral SSKTH read the translation with cold yellow eyes, then marked it as irrelevant to their conquest plans. Weak species deserve to die. In the Centauri system, the Alliance of Perfect Minds heard the Vithka's plea during their daily network synchronization. The message was discussed for exactly 3 seconds before being classified as mental contamination. Their firewalls were updated to block any future transmissions from the Kepler system. But the signal continued its journey, reaching places that Minho had never dreamed existed. It traveled past dead worlds and living ones, through nebulae that sparkled like jewels and empty spaces where even light seemed afraid to go. 9 to 7 light-years away, orbiting the yellow star that humans called Sol, a small monitoring station picked up the transmission. Commander Choi Minjun was finishing his night shift when the computer alerted him to an incoming message from deep space. Most signals from other species were routine. Trade requests, diplomatic notes, or scientific data that required careful translation. But this message was different. It carried an emotion that Minjun recognized immediately, even through the alien words. Desperation. He played the message 3 times, running it through the translation software that Earth had developed for communicating with other species. The words that appeared on his screen made his blood grow cold. We are the Vithka of Kepler 442b. We face extinction not for crimes committed, but for minds that cannot be networked. We think as individuals, not as a collective consciousness. For this difference, we have been condemned to die. If any civilization values individual thought, please, remember us when we are gone. Minjun sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. The message reminded him of stories his grandmother had told him about Earth's own dark history. Times when people had died simply for being different. For thinking differently, believing differently, or looking differently than those in power. He pressed the button that would connect him to Admiral Nam Hyun's personal communicator. The Admiral would not be happy about being woken up, but this could not wait until morning. Admiral, he said when her tired voice answered. I think you need to hear something. 20 minutes later, Admiral Hyun stood in the monitoring station, listening to the Vithka's message for the 5th time. Her expression grew more serious with each repetition. Around her, other officers had gathered to hear the transmission that was changing everything they thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. How long until this signal reaches other human colonies? She asked. It already has, replied Captain Song Ji-woo, checking her data pad. Mars Colony, Europa Station, and the asteroid mining facilities have all received copies. The message is spreading through our communication networks. Admiral Hyun nodded slowly. She had spent 30 years in Earth's Space Navy, protecting humanity from the dangers that lurked between the stars. But she had never imagined that being human itself might be considered dangerous by other species. Plot a course for the Kepler system, she ordered. And prepare the fleet for immediate departure. Admiral, Captain Song said carefully, the Galactic Council has forbidden all contact with the Vithka. If we interfere, it could mean war with every networked species in the galaxy. Admiral Hyun looked out through the station's windows at the blue marble of Earth spinning slowly below them. A planet where billions of individual minds worked together not because they had to, but because they chose to. Then we better make sure we choose the right side, she said. The signal had found its target. Now everything would change. The human fleet appeared in the Kepler 442 system like ghosts made of metal and light. 12 ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, each one different from the others in design and purpose. The lead vessel, UES Defiance, cut through space with engines that hummed rather than roared. Dr. Park Soo-yeon was working in the research station when her sensors detected the unknown energy signatures. Her hands froze over the controls as readings appeared that made no sense. These ships showed no signs of the neural networking that connected all known galactic civilizations. Minho, she called across the small room, her voice filled with confusion and hope. Come look at this. Dr. Kang Minho abandoned his work and rushed to her side. The scanner showed 12 vessels approaching their world, but each ship operated independently. No shared consciousness, no collective decision-making. Yet they moved together with a coordination that seemed impossible. Are they Jeltari? Asked Kim Ji-hoon, joining them at the scanner array with worry in his voice. No, Minho whispered, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. I think they might be like us. The communication system crackled to life, filling the station with a voice speaking their language in an accent they had never heard before. This is Admiral Nam Hien of the Earth Defense Force. We received your message. We have come to help. Across the quarantine zones, millions of Vithka heard those words. Families pressed against the energy barriers, tears streaming down faces that had forgotten how to hope. Children who had never known freedom pointed at the sky where small lights grew brighter with each passing minute. The first human shuttle landed in the central district just as the twin suns reached their highest point. Commander Choi Min-jun stepped out first, removing his helmet to breathe the same air as the people his species had traveled 97 light-years to save. Dr. Park Soo-yeon approached the landing site with trembling steps. Behind her, hundreds of Vithka gathered to see these strange beings who thought like them. The humans looked different from any species they had encountered. No crystalline skin, no scales, no features that marked them as networked beings. You came, Soo-yeon whispered when she reached the commander. Of course we came, Min-jun replied with a smile that needed no translation. Where we come from, thinking differently is not a crime. It is what makes us strong. Within hours, human shuttles were landing throughout the quarantine zones. Medical teams rushed to help the sick while engineers began setting up temporary shelters. The efficiency amazed the Vithka, who watched these beings coordinate complex operations without sharing a single thought. Captain Song Ji-woo established a communication hub while her team worked with Vithka technicians to understand their technology. The humans asked questions constantly, showing fascination with every difference they discovered. How do you work together so well without collective consciousness? Asked Lee Hyun-woo, watching human engineers rapidly construct housing units. Chief Engineer Yoon Dae-ho looked up from his work with dirt on his hands and joy in his eyes. Because we are all different, he explained. Different ideas, different solutions. When one person cannot solve a problem, another person can. Our differences make us stronger, not weaker. In the medical bay, human doctors worked alongside Kim Ji-hoon to treat patients who had been without proper care for months. Dr. Lisa Chen showed Ji-hoon techniques that humans had developed for treating stress-related illnesses, while learning about Vithka medicine that could heal wounds faster than anything Earth had ever created. Your people have suffered greatly, Dr. Chen said as they worked together to help a young mother who had not eaten properly in weeks. But we survived, Ji-hoon replied. And now we have hope again. The cooperation between the two species grew stronger with each passing hour. Vithka scientists shared their research on neural independence while human physicists explained technologies that worked without networked consciousness. Together, they began to see possibilities that neither species could have imagined alone. Admiral Hien walked through the main settlement as evening approached, watching her people work side by side with the Vithka. Children from both species played together, their laughter echoing off the temporary buildings that would soon become permanent homes on a new world. Admiral, Commander Min-jun approached with a serious expression. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple fleets converging on our position. Admiral Hien nodded calmly. She had expected this. The Galactic Council would not allow their authority to be challenged without a response. The networked species that ruled the galaxy believed that individual consciousness was a disease that needed to be eliminated. How long until they arrive? She asked. 6 hours, maybe 7. Admiral Hien looked around at the scene of cooperation and hope that surrounded them. Human and Vithka working together, proving that different minds could create something beautiful when they were free to think and dream. Then we better prepare to show them what individual consciousness can do, she said. The real test was about to begin. But for the first time in years, the Vithka would not face it alone. The Galactic Council fleet emerged from hyperspace like an angry storm made of metal and light. 300 ships filled the darkness around Kepler 442b, their hulls gleaming with the shared consciousness that connected every crew member across the massive formation. Each vessel pulsed with the same rhythm, thought with the same mind, moved with the same terrible purpose. Admiral Nam Hien stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the enemy formation through the main display. Her fleet of 12 ships looked like toys compared to the massive wall of firepower approaching them. But her expression remained calm. "All ships, maintain current positions," she broadcast to her fleet. "Remember what we discussed. They think as one mind. We think as many. That is our advantage." The Council's flagship, a crystalline behemoth called the Unity of Purpose, opened communications. The voice that emerged spoke in perfect harmony, as if 1,000 beings were talking as one person. "Human vessels, you are in violation of galactic law. Remove yourselves from this system immediately or face total destruction." "We are here to evacuate civilians," Admiral Hien replied calmly. "People whose only crime was thinking for themselves. The Vithka neural deficiency poses a contamination risk to all civilized species. Their elimination is necessary for galactic stability." On the planet below, Dr. Kang Minho had been brought aboard the human flagship to help coordinate the evacuation. Now he stepped forward, his voice carrying across space to the Council fleet. "I am Vithka. My people have created beautiful art, discovered new medicines, and loved our children just like you do. We are not contamination. We are what you used to be before you gave up your individual souls." The response was immediate and violent. Energy beams erupted from the Council fleet, racing toward the small human formation. The networked minds had calculated the perfect attack pattern to destroy all 12 ships simultaneously. But Captain Song Jiwoo had predicted this moment. Instead of the coordinated defense the Council expected, each human ship reacted differently. Some rolled away from the incoming fire. Others accelerated forward into the attack. A few simply vanished using experimental cloaking technology that the Council had never seen before. The carefully planned attack struck empty space. Commander Choi Minjun led a squadron of fighter craft in a weaving pattern that made no sense to the Council's targeting computers. "They cannot predict us," he called to his pilots over the communication system, "because we do not even know what we are going to do next." His squadron dove between the massive Council ships like birds dancing around sleeping giants. Their weapons were smaller, but they struck at unexpected places and unexpected times. The networked minds tried to adapt, but adaptation required predicting human behavior, and humans were beautifully unpredictable. The battle raged across the solar system. The Council's superior numbers should have won easily, but their collective consciousness became a weakness. When Captain Park Sung-jae disabled the neural relay on their command ship, 12 entire squadrons lost coordination immediately. Ships that had moved as one mind suddenly found themselves alone and confused. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Yoon Dae-ho worked with Vithka scientists in the planet's underground laboratories. Together, they had been preparing something special. A neural disruption field that the Vithka had been developing in secret for years, combined with human technology that could amplify its range. Activating the field now, Dae-ho announced over the communication system. The invisible wave spread outward from the planet, washing over the Council fleet like a silent tsunami. For the first time in centuries, the networked beings found their shared consciousness severed. Each ship's crew suddenly experienced something they had forgotten existed. Individual thought. The confusion was absolute. Council crews who had never made decisions alone did not know how to operate their own ships. Commanders who had always shared knowledge instantly found themselves unable to communicate with their own officers. The perfect formation dissolved into chaos as hundreds of vessels drifted without purpose. "This is Admiral Nam Hien," she broadcast to the scattered enemy fleet. "Your crews are now experiencing what we call individual consciousness. You have a choice. Learn to embrace what makes each person unique, or try to explain to your people why you lost a battle to 12 ships." On the bridge of the Unity of Purpose, Captain Zarkon stared at his control panels with eyes that saw clearly for the first time in decades. Around him, his crew members looked at each other as if meeting for the first time. The silence was deafening after a lifetime of shared thoughts. "Admiral," one of his officers said hesitantly, speaking aloud instead of through the neural network. I think we should withdraw." It was the first independent decision any of them had made in years. One by one, the Council vessels began to retreat. Not because the collective mind ordered it, but because individual crews chose to leave rather than fight a war they no longer understood. Admiral Hien watched them go, knowing that everything had changed. The galaxy would never be the same again. Individual consciousness had proven itself in battle, and word would spread to every corner of space. The Vithka would live, and they would not be the last species to choose freedom over conformity. 6 months after the Great Battle, the planet New Terra bloomed with life and hope. The world that humans had chosen for the Vithka refugees sparkled under a golden sun, its blue oceans reflecting white clouds that drifted across endless skies. Cities grew from empty plains as two species worked together to build something neither could have created alone. Dr. Kang Minho walked through the research district, where human and Vithka scientists shared laboratories and ideas. The buildings looked different from anything either species had built before. Human creativity mixed with Vithka precision created structures that were both beautiful and practical. The neural disruption technology is ready for mass production, reported Dr. Park Suyin, showing him data on her tablet. The breakthrough they had achieved together would change everything. Other species trapped by collective consciousness could now choose freedom. In the government building at the center of New Terra City, Admiral Nam Hien reviewed reports from across the galaxy. The victory at Kepler 442b had sent shock waves through space. Species that had been forgotten or suppressed by the Galactic Council were reaching out to Earth, seeking protection and alliance. The crystalline wanderers from Proxima 3 want to join us, said Commander Choi Min-jun, entering her office with a stack of messages. They never achieved neural networking because their silicon-based minds work differently than organic brains. And the aquatic collectives from Oceanus Prime, added Captain Song Ji-woo. Their hive minds operate underwater in ways the Council species cannot understand or control. Each day brought new requests for help. The Independent Systems Alliance grew from 12 human ships and 8 million Vithka refugees to include dozens of species from across the galaxy. They all shared one thing in common. They valued what made each individual special instead of demanding that everyone think the same way. Kim Ji-hoon established the first interspecies medical exchange program on New Terra. Human doctors learned about Vithka healing techniques that could mend broken bones in hours. Vithka physicians discovered human methods for treating diseases of the mind and heart. Together, they developed treatments that neither species could have imagined alone. In the engineering district, Lee Hyun-woo worked with Chief Engineer Yoon Dae-ho to design communication systems that worked without neural networking. Their breakthrough allowed different species to share information while keeping their individual thoughts private. Freedom of the mind became the foundation of their new society. The children were the most amazing part of the new world. Human and Vithka youngsters played together in schools where being different was celebrated instead of feared. They learned each other's languages, shared each other's games, and created art that combined the best of both cultures. Look at this, Dr. Suyin showed Minho a painting created by a mixed class of 10-year-olds. The artwork showed beings from many different worlds standing together under stars that spelled out words in a dozen languages. The message was simple but powerful: different is beautiful. The Galactic Council still existed, but its power was fading. Many of its member species had begun to question the wisdom of collective consciousness. Some had even started experimenting with individual thought, inspired by the success of the Independent Systems Alliance. They are afraid, Admiral Hien explained to the Alliance Council during their weekly meeting. Representatives from 37 species filled the chamber, each one speaking with their own voice instead of sharing a single mind. For thousands of years, they believed that unity meant everyone thinking the same thoughts. Now they see that real unity comes from different minds choosing to work together. On the observation deck of New Terra's Capitol building, Minho and Suyin watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Ships from a dozen different worlds moved through the atmosphere, carrying trade goods and messages of friendship between species that had once been enemies. Do you think the Council will try to attack us again? Suyin asked. Admiral Hien joined them at the window, her uniform bearing the new Alliance insignia that showed many different symbols united in a circle. Let them try, she said with a smile. We have something they will never understand. Billions of different ways of looking at the same problem. In the distance, construction crews were building the Alliance's first deep space academy. Students from dozens of worlds would come there to learn that diversity of thought was not just acceptable, but necessary for survival in a universe full of wonders and challenges. The Academy's motto, carved in stone above its entrance, captured everything the Alliance believed: many minds, one future. Captain Song Ji-woo approached with news from the outer colonies. The insect species from the Tau Ceti system wants to join, she reported. They say their hive mind has always allowed for individual drones to think independently when needed. And the energy beings from the Vega Nebula, added Commander Min-jun. They exist as pure thought, but each consciousness remains separate and unique. The alliance continued to grow, welcoming any species that valued individual freedom over forced conformity. They built new worlds, discovered new technologies, and created art that celebrated the infinite variety of intelligent life. The Vithka had been condemned to die for thinking differently. Instead, they had helped birth a new era where thinking differently was the greatest gift anyone could offer to the galaxy. In a universe full of wonders, the most wonderful thing of all was the simple right to be yourself.